All right, team, welcome to another episode of the Exceptional Leadership Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Matt Hamilton. Delighted to have your company with me once again from wherever you might be listening to the show from around the world. Certainly do appreciate you choosing this show to keep you company, whatever you might be doing as you listen. Now, today we're going to talk about something that can be called suicidal empathy, right? So at what point does having empathy inhibit our ability as leaders to do our job? Now, I'm certainly of the opinion that you must have empathy to lead exceptionally, but I'm also aware that too much of it can absolutely be detrimental to your ability to make hard decisions and do what is necessary. So we're going to dive into that in some detail for this episode. Now, as we so often do, I've chosen an example from history that will help us to illustrate the point, and we'll do that now, and it should set the scene nicely for the conversation on this topic. We're going to go all the way back to 1894, and we're going to talk about Nicholas II and some events that surrounded that historical figure. So without further ado, here we go. When Nicholas II inherited the Russian throne in 1894, he wasn't eager for power. By most accounts, he felt unprepared for the enormous responsibility of ruling the world's largest empire. Unlike many rulers of his era, Nicholas was known as a gentle, polite, and deeply religious family man. He was devoted to his wife, Alexandra Fyodorovna, that's a mouthful, and their children, and he valued loyalty above almost everything else. That devotion was tested when their only son, Alexei, was diagnosed with haemophilia, a life-threatening condition at the time. This meant that every injury could become fatal, leaving the imperial family living in constant fear. Into this crisis stepped Grigory Rasputin. On several occasions, after Rasputin prayed with the family, Alexei's condition appeared to improve. Historians still debate why this was. Perhaps his calming influence reduced stress, or perhaps he discouraged doctors from giving aspirin, which is now known to worsen bleeding. Whatever the reason, Alexandra became convinced that Rasputin was saving her son's life. As Rasputin's influence grew, so did public outrage. Ministers, nobles, and even members of the royal family repeatedly urged Nicholas to distance himself from the controversial mystic, whose behaviour and reputation were damaging confidence in the monarchy. But Nicholas refused to take action, not because Rasputin was a capable advisor, but because he trusted his wife's judgment and could not bring himself to cast aside somebody that they believed had helped their son. His loyalty to those closest to him repeatedly outweighed the political needs of the empire. That pattern extended beyond Rasputin. Nicholas was often reluctant to dismiss ineffective officials because he disliked betraying people who had served him faithfully. Over time, this eroded confidence in his leadership. Russia's collapse cannot be blamed on this alone. The country was already facing revolution, economic hardship, and the immense pressures of World War I. But Nicholas's story remains a powerful leadership lesson, and that is that compassion and loyalty, while being admirable qualities, can prevent a leader from making difficult decisions when required. Those very strengths can, in other words, become weaknesses. In trying to protect the people that he loved the most, Nicholas ultimately weakened the institution that he was required to protect. And that is an interesting example from history that, after doing some investigation, was pretty pivotal in prompting some of the notes that I'm going to share with you today on this topic. And of course, as we do, we'll bring it back to a relevant setting for you and I to explore, and that'll be the boardroom and the corporate environment. Now, empathy, what is empathy? let's set some terms of reference here before we kick off. Empathy is essentially seeing and feeling things from another person's perspective. It's being able to relate to someone, to put yourself in their shoes and see things from their point of view so that you can gain an understanding of how they might be thinking and feeling in regards to a specific situation. Now, we've already covered that you can be too empathetic and that it can lead to issues. And people who are highly agreeable and naturally kind and caring might be at higher risk of getting themselves into trouble in this area. I don't know if this is you. I'm certainly quite an agreeable person. I will have conflict if I absolutely need to, but I certainly don't enjoy it. And I do generally prefer to avoid it if possible. So this is something that I've had to watch out for myself. Because as leaders, we must know where the boundaries of our empathy lie. And this is really the key theme that I'm going to keep returning to throughout this episode. Empathy is required. It's a fundamental thing that you need to have to be a good person and an effective leader. But we have to have boundaries with respect to how far our empathy goes. Otherwise, we are at risk of becoming doormats and being trodden all over by those who are a little bit more manipulative amongst us, and they do unfortunately exist, looking to take advantage of kind people like you and I. Empathy is necessary to lead exceptionally, is my opinion. But empathy can prevent us from doing what is required. Now, I'm not sure what your personal experience has been in the workplace as a leader, or perhaps even in your personal life with respect to your personal relationships. But I've got a couple of examples that I'm going to bring to the table today to share with you that I think highlight the nuances of leadership and perhaps show how tricky it can be working out how much empathy to show and perhaps when to pull back. Both of those examples that I'm about to share with you, I have actually had to navigate as a leader. Now, of course, I'm paraphrasing to protect the privacy and the identity of individuals as always, but these have both occurred. So the first one, I had a ineffective employee, bad employee. This person was underperforming. They were rude, arrogant, really negative influence around the office and for the organisation. And this had been going on for years before I arrived. And the behaviour certainly didn't show any signs of letting up when I came on board. It was a bad attitude right from the beginning. And I had numerous conversations with this individual, giving them chances to rectify the behaviour, letting them know what that behaviour was and what it looked like and what my expectations were. And it was pretty clear towards the end, after 6 months of having these conversations and addressing poor behaviour, that it wasn't getting anywhere, that this person just had a really bad attitude and seemed incapable of making the changes that we needed them to make. So I knew what had to occur, right? That was that their contract not be continued with us. But what really added complexity to this situation was that this person had a young family, supporting a partner, kids, very young kids, and maybe even we could take it a step further for the benefit of this example and say maybe they even might have one on the way, a young growing family that this person is the provider for. But in addition to that, we know that this person is toxic to the culture of the workplace. They're bad for the organisation and those around them. So what do we do? And as an empathetic person, committed to finding balance and ensuring that boundaries were in place while also being fair to this person, but cognizant of my responsibilities as a leader, I had to get to the point where I made the decision not to continue the contract. And that didn't feel good, knowing this context in this person's personal life, knowing that it would likely cause them a lot of stress, knowing that there was a risk of a personal flare-up from a conflict perspective between them and myself when I gave them the news. But I knew it was the right thing to do because I had established those boundaries, let this person know where those boundaries were consistently over a prolonged period of time. And despite all that, this person had chosen to continually breach those boundaries. So I was comfortable that I'd done all that I could. But even that being the case, it still didn't feel good to make this decision. But I did make the decision, and it turned out to be the right one. But that is something that if you are overly empathetic, you might have a lot of trouble doing. You might only think of the personal circumstances, which could lead to decision paralysis simply because you are overly empathetic in a situation where you needed to make a hard decision. I'll share a second example with you, again paraphrasing here, but one that I actually had to deal with. Maybe you can relate. I had a volatile employee, very, very volatile employee. I've had several of these over my career. And you know, one thing that I think was common across all these examples is that these people were experiencing significant stress in their personal lives, which was exacerbating any mental health conditions that they had or temperament issues that they had, which were then exposed at work when dealing with difficult customers or dealing with situations and people at work that stressed them out. And this was really problematic because it would result in customers being spoken to rudely, immense and constant conflict between these people and their colleagues, which then I would then have to deal with as a leader. I would always feel like I was walking around with the proverbial mop and bucket, cleaning up after their mess because things would get escalated to me to deal with from a disciplinary perspective or a conflict management and resolution perspective. And again, I took the same approach with both of these cases that are coming to mind, and I sat down and had a conversation with them and said, look, this is the situation we're in. This behaviour is unacceptable. Here's why. Here's the code of conduct. Here's the effect that it's having on people. Here's the effect that it's having on me. I need it to stop. And after prolonged discussions and a prolonged period of time, again, greater than 6 months of this, I found myself in a position where I realised that change was not going to be forthcoming. And it wasn't that I couldn't relate to why the person was finding it really difficult, or that I didn't even agree that some of the things they were getting frustrated about were valid and indeed annoying. The issue was that in both of these cases, I wasn't able to get the person to take that next step and moderate their behaviour so that we could work things through constructively. It was just a case of blowing up at everything and everyone all the time over a prolonged period of time. And obviously that is really detrimental to culture. And I had to take action and again, not extend a contract, and in a couple of cases, take formal disciplinary action. And again, difficult to do, knowing that there were nasty things happening in the personal lives of these people that exacerbated this frustration and these temperament issues. But in both of those cases that I shared with you there, the people ended up no longer working for the organisation. And I didn't feel good about either of those outcomes. It still felt like it was a shortcoming on my part, a failure on my part, that I couldn't get these people over the line. But of course that is inevitable. We can't control others. So in closing, the point that I want to make is empathy is super important. What does empathy allow us to do in those situations? It says, hey, I'm not just going to let you go without giving you a really solid chance to understand what the behaviour is, why is it damaging, and thirdly, what can you and I do to help it get rectified so that we can work together in a productive manner. That's what empathy allows us to do. Perhaps it enables us to take stock of those situations that are going on in personal lives, often really quite worthwhile being aware of those as a leader, and working with the person in the capacity that we have in a work sense to help mitigate the impact of those, whether that's employee assistance programs like free counselling, so on and so forth, whether that's having more of an understanding when someone needs to take a personal day because they've shared with you that there are some nasty things occurring outside of the workplace. That is all well and truly within the bounds of leadership and effective management. But when we have behaviour that continues despite that productive empathetic comms coming from us as leaders, and when it keeps affecting people negatively and slowing down the business and being detrimental to the organisation and the culture that we work so hard to achieve and maintain, that's where our empathy has to have limits. We have to be able to cut it off at a certain point and say, look, beyond this point, I cannot tolerate, and action is taken. So we need balance, is what I'm saying, and it is sometimes a little bit difficult working out where to draw those lines. I hope that example helps you, team. Again, thanks for joining in the conversation. I certainly appreciate it. If you'd like to access more material that could help you on your leadership journey, I'll encourage you to visit the show's website, www.exceptionalleadershippodcast.com. I'll put the link in the show notes if you want to click through and have a look. I do work hard to produce blogs and reading material so that you can have a read through and brush up on your leadership skills in relation to topics that we've discussed in times gone by. And of course, alternatively, have a look at the back catalogue of the show. You know, this is the 71st episode. There's an extensive back catalogue on every topic you can imagine. Hunt through that, see if there's something that addresses the specific concern or query you have, and brush up that way. Of course, follow the show, subscribe to the show, and if you'd be so kind, leave the show a 5-star review on whatever app you consume the show on. Tell a friend, tell 10 friends. Have a fantastic fortnight, and I'll see you for the next episode. See you later.